In this video, we're going to talk about the economic life of the tortilla in Mexico. Maize, or corn as it's called in the United States, has long played an extremely important role in Mexico. This picture here is from the Mendoza Codex, and it shows an Aztec mother teaching her daughter how to make tortillas. Maize also played an important role in Mayan society. In the Popol Vuh, which is a sacred text to the Mayan people, it relates the creation myth, where it took the gods 4 attempts to make perfect human beings. First ones were created out of mud and then out of wood, but they didn't get it right until they made them out of maize. Thus, maize people were considered the best possible creatures, and maize the best possible food. There are lots of legends about how the first tortilla came about. By one account, an unmarried Mayan king stated that he would marry whichever Mayan woman who had the best idea of improving the life of the people. The Mayan god of food visited a young poor maiden in her sleep and taught her how to make tortillas. With her idea, she won over the king as well as the Mayan people. The government started intervening in the production and distribution of crops in 1937 when it created an agency to regulate wheat. This integrated peasants, or campesinos, into the market economy, supported farmers with high prices, and tried to ensure that the poorest households had access to cheap staple goods. In terms of tortillas, the result was an extensive network of small corn mills and tortillerias that ensured a plentiful supply of fresh tortillas to households. The tortilla itself became a symbol of Mexican national identity. You can see signs of this in the work of Diego Rivera, the great Mexican artist, who painted portraits like the grinder and tortilla makers in the mid-1920s, both of which pictured rural women making tortillas. In 1965, the Mexican government combined all of its food interventions into a single agency called CONASUPO, which basically stands for National Basic Food Agency. It was an agency controlled by the executive branch, and it intervened in 11 basic crops: barley, beans, copra, corn, cotton, rice, sesame, sorghum, soybeans, sunflower, and wheat. From the 1970s to 1990s, these 11 crops made up about 30% of Mexico's gross agricultural production. Corn, however, was by far the most important of these 11 crops. It made up almost 60% of the total value of crops controlled by the agency. CONASUPO's tortilla program included 707,000 households by 1990, and by late 1991, more than 2 million households. The Mexican debt crisis in 1982 had a big effect on the government's food policy. The government was broke, and international agencies like the IMF and the World Bank were demanding that the government stop controlling prices. The government complied, although it still kept controls on key items like tortillas, milk, and beans. Even with this change of policy, though, the number of households participating in CONASUPO programs actually increased. In 1983 and 84, the government spent more on the agency than it did on healthcare or education. By 1988, it was estimated that 30% of all households in Mexico were participating in CONASUPO programs. The Tortibonos program began in 1984. These were food stamps that subsidized tortillas, especially for poor urban households. The beneficiaries could buy tortillas at about a 50% discount from retail stores that CONASUPO ran to sell subsidized basic goods. In 1990, the government replaced the Tortibonos with a program called Tortillas sin costo, or Tortillas without cost, which gave food stamps to more than 2 million households. It offered 1 kilo of free tortillas per day from the manufacturers. This represented about 3% of total corn consumption in Mexico each year and about 50% of household daily consumption. A government agency like CONASUPO, especially in a one-party state where there may be less oversight, is ripe for corruption problems, and this was certainly true in the Mexican case. The agency reported, quote, no reliable financial records for 1982 to 1988. In 1993, the government decided to allow a Mexican university, ITESM, from Monterrey, to evaluate how well or how poorly the agency was doing its job. The university group surveyed more than 10,000 households and found that 40% of the participants earned too much to be able to qualify for the milk program. They blamed unions and corrupt officials for the result. When they tried to do a similar survey in Mexico City, they couldn't even really get started. 30% of the official beneficiaries either couldn't be physically located or there wasn't enough information on them to locate them. CONASUPO and the tortilla subsidy were both ended in 1998 and 1999. The decision was relatively controversial. Mexicans ate around 220 pounds of tortillas each year. One of the reasons it was possible was the fact that Raul Salinas, brother of previous President Carlos Salinas and director of CONASUPO from 1982 to 1992, was put in jail after having been found to have stolen $140 million during his brother's presidency. In 1997, President Ernesto Zedillo started Progresa, which was later renamed Oportunidades, or Opportunities. And these programs used direct cash transfers instead of food aid, and the transfers were conditional on meeting certain health and education goals. The issue of whether the Mexican government should intervene in the price of basic commodities like tortillas has still been hotly debated. In 2007, 75,000 people marched in protest in Mexico City because of rising tortilla prices, which had doubled since 2006. Popular slogan was "Sin maíz no hay país," or "Without corn, there is no country." One thing is certain, politicians definitely took note. The British magazine The Economist noted at the time, "Few things are more politically damaging in Mexico than pain at the taco stand." Many of the marchers and the media blamed U.S. ethanol subsidies, as corn is the primary ingredient in making ethanol. But the corn used in tortillas is white corn, and ethanol is made from yellow corn, which isn't usually used for human consumption. Plus, the white corn crop in Mexico had been substantial in 2006. Others blamed high oil prices, which drove up the price of transportation and distribution of tortillas, but this still couldn't account for a doubling of tortilla prices. The Mexican government attributed it to monopolistic practices and speculation, and they may have a point, since at the time one company alone, Gruma, controlled 70% of the tortilla and cornmeal market. This issue isn't limited to agriculture. More generally, as the government has retreated from its role in the economy, it hasn't done a good job of antitrust enforcement, and often Mexican economic sectors have been left with private monopolies or monopolistic competition. There are many really interesting articles on this topic. Some of them that I used include The Social Life of the Tortilla, Food, Cultural Politics, and Contested Commodification by David Lind and Elizabeth Barham from 2004. Also Antonio Yunez Naure, The Dismantling of Conosupo, a Mexican State Trader in Agriculture. Kenneth Mitchell's 2005 Building State Capacity, Reforming Mexican State Food Aid Programs in the 1990s. And a paper on the comparison of food assistance programs in Mexico and the United States from researchers at the USDA. There's also been several interesting articles in The Economist about tortillas and agricultural policies in general in Mexico. One is called Tortilla Blues, A Hard Lesson in Pocketbook Politics in 2007. Another one in 2007 called Mexico's Economy, Monopolies and Tortillas.